Advanced Health Sciences Psychology B, Virtual Interactive Notebook 4, Day 2, Ego. Essential question, how do the id, ego, and superego interact? The main idea is Freud's ego. So this is, Sigmund Freud came up with this. This is Freud's theory. Freud's theory is not scientific, but parts of it have been shown to be scientifically valid. Subtopics. We're going to do something a little different today. So if you were to go to Chapter 11, Section 2, you would find a diagram that looks like an iceberg. So go ahead and scroll down to number 2 where it says copy this diagram into your notes. And I want you to copy that diagram into your notes. What you are seeing is the unconscious, which is represented as the ocean, the conscious, which is represented as the sky, and then there's an iceberg. So what you see or what you feel consciously for Freud is only the tip of the iceberg that peaks above the ocean of the subconscious or unconscious. And the iceberg is composed of 3 parts, the superego, the ego, and the id. So some of Freud's theories they're not borne out by scientific research. For example, if you were to go to this section, you would see his psychosexual stages below. We're not going to cover that because they're not real. They're not real. They're just Freud's ideas. But it turns out that you do have an unconscious or a subconscious. You have a lot of thoughts that happen below conscious awareness. For example, I knew someone in high school who wore a particular kind of cheap perfume. And for years afterwards, I think they stopped making the perfume, but for years afterwards, sometimes I would smell this cheap perfume and I would get a sense of dread and I wouldn't know why. And then I would remember, oh, that's the perfume she wore. So, right? So that's my conscious mind trying to figure out why I'm having this thought. Well, the thought that I'm having that I don't want to have and that I didn't choose to have comes from the subconscious. And it turns out you do have a pretty active subconscious. Freud described the interaction of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind in terms of the ego, the id, and the superego. Okay, so what does that mean? You are going to define each part of that iceberg. You can either define it inside the iceberg or draw a line, whatever you want. Here's what I did, right? So this is my iceberg, and then I just wrote the definitions down here, okay? So the ego is your rational mind. The ego is the thoughts you choose to have, all right? The id represents your primitive urges. So for ego up here, write rational mind. And for id, write primitive urges. And if you have a hard time remembering it, remember that the software company that made Doom, which is a very lurid, violent game, they called themselves id, right? Id produced Doom. That's how I remembered it when I was your age, because we had Doom. We weren't just rubbing sticks together to make fire. We had lighters at that point. So the ego is the rational mind, and the id is the unconscious mind. Now, what if you just had an id and an ego, right? So your id would say, wow, I want to eat that whole tub of ice cream. And your ego would say, well, that's probably not good for your health. So there is something that mediates between, just one second. What?
We had a 10:30 meeting. Do you still want to do it?
Nope. Okay, let me back up. So you have the ego and the id. The id wants to eat the ice cream. The ego says that's not really a good idea, but whatever. So you eat the ice cream. So there is a force that stands between the id and the ego. And Freud called that the superego. And that is defined as conscience. So for Freud, this is how it works. The id says, I want to eat all of that ice cream. And the ego says, well, that's probably bad for your health. And the superego says, yeah, you should feel bad for having that thought. And then hopefully the superego, I guess, sort of browbeats you into not eating the ice cream. So the superego is the conscience that says, oh, no, that's bad. That's bad. You're bad. You're bad. Now, Freud thought that the id was a collection, he called it cesspools of forbidden desire. So you have all these forbidden desires that your rational mind knows is wrong, and then the superego makes you feel bad and that's what keeps you from doing them. And that's as far as we're going to take that, because Freud was kind of weird about this stuff. Now, Freud also noticed something that is true. Psychologists still talk about these. So these seem to be scientifically valid. So Freud is a mixed bag. Some of his stuff is valid and some of it is not. Psychosexual stages are definitely not valid. They're also bizarre. But you do display defense mechanisms. Now, for Freud, a defense mechanism is when the ego uses the id to deflect attacks against it. All right. So when you're attacked psychologically, you don't want to feel bad. And so to reduce that anxiety, you tend to use defense mechanisms. I want you to read through these and then tell me which one do you use the most. And I want you to define that thing and tell me how you know you use it. So, for example, for me, reading through this, I use repression. Repression is suppressing painful memories and thoughts. And so if I have, like for me, if I do something really dumb, when I start thinking about it, I just think, don't think about that. It's in the past. There's nothing you can do about it. It's useless. That actually is Stoic philosophy. So Stoic philosophy, at least in that sense, could be a defense mechanism for Freud. Now, I'm not convinced that that's a bad way to go. Look, the bad thing happened. You already felt bad about it. What are you accomplishing here? Let's move on. Right? But Freud, I think, would call that repression. So I've taken Freud's repression and I've actually tried to get better at it. It's kind of interesting to think about. So I want you to do that for your output. I want you to pick the defense mechanism that you display the most, and I want you to write down the mechanism, and I want you to define it, and then tell me how you know that you use it. All right? And that will conclude day 2. Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow for day 3.